We interrupt this broadcast for an important announcement. An accident has occurred at the Chernobyl atomic power plant in Ukraine. One of the reactors has been damaged and measures are currently being taken to deal with the consequences.
We just received some live footage of Chernobyl at this current time. Korea said that reactor number 4 was undertaking regular testing when it malfunctioned and exploded, releasing a significant amount of radiation into the atmosphere.
It is believed that the 4 personnel working close to the reactor died on impact, but other fatalities are yet unknown. The reactor overheated and fell into emergency shutdown. The fuel began to explode, and this caused a fire that lasted 9 days and released large amounts of radiation into the atmosphere. The reactor was not encased in concrete like it should have been, and the building sustained severe damage.
Photos of Pripyat before the nuclear disaster. Students were having lessons as usual, and some of them were celebrating their graduation from high school and secondary school with an unique event called the Last Bell. Little pioneers were taking a photo, and there is a photo of a rock band called Pulsar. Then we are going to have a look at the power plant. This is the power plant before the disaster, and these are the photos of the control room of the power plant. However, one of the worst nuclear power plant accidents was happened, and the accident destroyed the power plant. Here are 2 photos of the power plant after the explosion, and there's a photo of rescuers with poor gears. Last but not least, we are going to have a look at photos of Pripyat after the explosion. No one is living at Pripyat. In the lecture hall, houses, consumer centers, everything was damaged. There's a dominant difference between before and after the disaster.
The disaster management cycle acts as a tool for analysing disaster within 3 main phases: pre-disaster, response and post-disaster. Every phase of the disaster management cycle is important to disaster studies, and such model illustrates the cyclical process that is carried out.
We didn't have sufficient training. There was a lack of trainings on the operators, and there was insufficient adequate training about the operating system, a lack of rules and incomplete instructions. People living in Pripyat was not evacuated until 36 hours after the explosion, and the potassium iodide tablets was not distributed at once, so they were not really effective, and there was no emergency planning for the nuclear power plant since they were considered as a luxury. The design was so weak, and the power plant was not built very properly, and there was a failure to inform the engineers about the explosion. Operating procedure was not modified.
Belarus was directly in the danger zone. 2 decades later, the government was still giving money to the country because it took 70% of the fallout. The red zones are places most affected and are areas which are closed. These areas contained over 40 curies per kilometre squared of cesium-137. The lighter red zones are permanent control zones and contain 15 to 40 curies of cesium-137. The pink zones are only controlled periodically and have 5 to 15 curies per kilometre squared of cesium-137. The yellow zones are unmanned zones and have the least contamination. The International Nuclear and Radiological Event Scale explains the significance of events from a range of activities, including industrial and medical use of radiation sources, operations of nuclear facilities, and transport of radioactive material. A mechanical or electrical fault stopped the pumps from sending water to the core. The reactor then shut down. The valve that opens to release the pressure became stuck open, and cooling water then carried on pouring out of this valve. The reactor then overheated. Unlike Chernobyl, the TMI-2's containment building held most of the radioactive material inside. In 1987, the European Community established the European Community Urgent Radiological Information System, through which the EU member states are asked to notify the Commission on radiological emergencies and to provide information relevant to decreasing the foreseen radiological effects. This footage shows Pripyat in its current state, a town that was once home to 50,000 people. It has now been taken over by nature, with footage of a rusted fairground, scattered papers, and trees growing inside buildings. Chernobyl is still very much radioactive and very dangerous. Thousands of workers are still employed to deal with the cleanup and to guard the exclusion zones.